County Road 8, the Hartsough resident, town of Farmington. Lloyd, thank you for agreeing to talk to me for a little bit here. Tell me about the gas wells, if you could, the town of Gorham around Reed Corners, Rushville area.
Steve, I was born in '32, and what I'm going to tell you about the gas wells is information that came from my grandfather and my sisters and my folks. I think it was about 1928 or that era that they came up from Oil City, Pennsylvania, and surveyed area around Reach Corners, and in particularly an area south of Art Frankish's farm, for looking for gas and for oil.
Now, Art Frankish's farm, was that the same place that George Frankish had?
Art Frankish was George's father.
Okay, so we're a little bit south of Lake to Lake Road.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they surveyed the area down there, and then they took leases from the farmers. As I recall, it was they paid $1 an acre for a 5-year lease. That doesn't seem like much, but my father, and they split it up between 2 payments. And I can remember even after I was born, my father would get a little check for $15, $20 for his lease, and that was greatly received.
Now, but your father was over on Depew Road, right?
They leased the whole area.
Oh, okay.
Even over, do you remember where Birdsey, a farm over on Robinson Road?
No.
Well, it's down pretty close to 5 and 20.
Okay.
The only reason I mention that farm is they dug a gas well over there, and they struck some gas, not enough to be commercially.
Okay, was that the Kuntz farm later?
Yeah.
The apple people?
Right.
Okay.
And but there was enough to supply the house and lighting and so forth at that time. But anyway, after they surveyed this and took leases on it, by then they sent up a crew to drill wells. And the one in which I'm particular remember is the one up on the farm south of the Lake to Lake Road. Now, there's pictures of the derricks. They were probably 20 to 25 feet tall. And I do not know if he was a petroleum engineer or not, but there was a guy by the name of Harry Schillings, and there were 6 people, 6 men there, that came to work on the crew. Now, 4 of those people lived with my grandfather, Delbert Powell, and that house had 8 bedrooms. In the back of it there was 4, excuse me, in the front there were 4. And they rented out all 4 bedrooms in the back.
To these roustabouts?
Pardon?
To these oil people?
Yes. And they had a bedroom they could use. There was a bathroom in the house, but hardly anybody ever used it. And they had their working clothes. The women did the laundry for their working clothes. I don't know what they'd done with their underwear, but that's here. They were given their 2 meals a day, and they packed a lunch for them to take to the job site, and they paid $1 a day.
The men did?
Yes. And that was a source of income for them. I mean, they were felt great about that. And so that was that group. Now, my parents, who lived over on Depew Road, gave up 2 rooms in our little house for a man and his wife. And they had a bedroom, and they had a living area.
Like a little parlor?
Yes.
Okay.
And they had kitchen privileges. They could go into my mother's kitchen and cook their meals and so forth. And I'm always, my sister told me this, that amused that my mother became very agitated because the wife would often wash out the condoms and put them on the well handle to dry.
Condoms?
Yes.
Okay.
She was disgusted with that.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. Now, were they working the same well
Yes.
site?
They were working at the same site up there. They this went on for about a year or two, and they came down to into the corners themselves, and they dug a well right at the corner of the main highway and Depew Road. And there again, there was no gas that was commercially feasible.
Now, this well, you're talking Depew Road and 247?
Yes,
Okay, was it near, was it between Depew Road and the church somewhere?
no, right across from the hotel.
Right across from the hotel. Would this be the same well that Herb Frankish would talk about fellas dropping matches down?
Yes.
Okay.
When we went to Grange, we always went over there and threw a match down the well. She'd go, boom, she'd blow up.
And how high would the flame come?
Oh, not very high, 4 or 5 feet. I mean,
Really?
Yeah. I mean, this is so. After they left, it wasn't commercially feasible, so these workers left. But every year thereafter, this person by name of Harry Schillings, who was the engineer, would come back to Powell's to go hunting. And I think Fred wrote, and probably Gordon wrote, went hunting with him. And this was for pheasants.
Mm-hmm.
I was then alive, and he was a nice man. I mean, he had at this time, he had a little fringe of white around the edge of his hair, and he spoke very nicely, and his wife was very thin, and all the rest of the women of the community were very portly, and he brought 2 Springer Spaniel dogs with him.
To assist in the hunt?
And this went on up through close to the 50s. And so whenever he came, I mean, we were all fascinated and told, hey, Harry Schillings is up to go hunting. So we'd wander over at night and sit and talk in the parlor over there about
Now, Harry and his wife, Harry lived at Powell's, or Harry and his wife lived with your parents?
He lived at Powell's.
Okay.
His wife was not with him at that time.
Okay.
So that was the relationship was established. And he came around, as I say, for many years thereafter. He always drove a big Cadillac car, and we'd never seen one of them things before. And so that was that experience. And
So they were actually for a year to 2 years working on the site?
yeah, but not continuously. In other words, sort of good weather, they would come back and work on the site, and then they.
Did they ever draw any significant amounts of natural gas or oil out of there?
No.
Uh-huh.
I mean, they never. I suppose at that time it was not commercially, for reasons I can't explain. I understand that recently they have tried again to find gas in this area, but that might be the fact that you can drill so much deeper now, and that may be the reason that they think that there could be something in that area.
Wouldn't they have known a couple months into the operation that it wasn't going to pan out? Why would it take so long, do you think?
I don't know.
I see.
I mean, understand that here they are, I mean, where they got the lumber from, I don't know. But you had to build derricks, and you had to bring in machinery to run drills and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's an operation where you simply, came in this week and dug down 100 feet and didn't hit anything. I think that the fact that it took so long to establish whether it was feasible or not. And so that's basically what I know about the area of drilling wells and so forth.
Was this the same crew that drilled the spot there near the Grange?
Yes.
Same people?
I mean, they moved around and tried here and there. They had all these, well, they could go any place. They had a lease on these places, and so they kept trying to find some location which would be feasible to commercially find gas.
And they also did the Birdsey
Yes.
property, which I think
Now
I
that
now
would
know is...
be, well, probably 3 or 4 miles from the location.
From the Frankish farm?
Yeah.
Oh, all of that. all of
Yes,
that.
even more, that's
Yes,
right.
yes. So we're talking around 26 to 28?
Yes,
I
in
see.
that time frame. And it's, when I think about the fact that you can give up that much area of your house, to rent to these fellows, and secondly, the fact that there was not the, bath facilities and so forth that you have today, it was pretty crude.
I wonder what Ethel Powell thought about all these rough and tumble characters in the house.
You're right in wondering.
Now the Hartsoughs were, the church that they attended was the Baptist Church in Reed Corners, correct?
Yes.
Tell me assorted rememberings of events or as told to you or that you witnessed at the Baptist Church.
Okay, the Baptist Church was once, well, that was in the 1840s, was located, it's what we know as Pickett's Corners. Down at Pickett Corners right now, there's a little cemetery which became associated with the Baptist Church. It's set right there on that corner.
And that's going to be worked on this summer.
The Bethel church was moved into Gorham, and so therefore you had 2 Baptist churches approximately 2 miles apart. And so it was obviously that they were too close together. Many of the members who were a member of that church at Pickett Corners went to the church in Gorham, and so they lost membership. So my great-grandfather was on the committee, and a piece of ground was purchased on Depew Road at the top of the knoll in Reach Corners. And I don't know how, I wish I knew how, whether they used oxen or however they did, but they moved that building to that site in Reach Corners. And then, of course, my great-grandfather had many children, but
Was that Hiram?
that was Henry Lewis,
Henry Lewis
my great-grandfather.
Hartsough.
And my grandfather, whose name was Albert, this is my father telling me this, helped build a steeple on that little church. And Albert and his will in 1918 left to the church the sum of $500.
Wow.
Well, I often thought that what a measly sum. What could they do with that? But he had a big restriction on it. The $500 could only be used if the church burnt, and they could then rebuild the church with that money. But as you think about it today, for the size of the church, and at that particular time, that would have bought the material, and they would have used their own labor, and they would have replaced that church for that sum of $500. That $500 was under restriction, of course, and well, it was back in the 1960s. Herb Frankish and Charlie Rote came to my sisters and myself, and they were building a additional wing,
Yep.
educational wing, and asked if we could sign off to give them permission to use that $500. Well, certainly, I mean, the Baptist church was then gone, and so we signed off so that they could put it into the educational wing at the Congregational church.
So the other church burned twice, but the Baptist church never burned. Do you think, Lloyd, that the church was taken apart, or do you think it was put on rollers? How do you think they brought that church up?
You know, I never explored that. I mean, my father, we sat in the back of the church on the pews after building the fires one Sunday morning, and he related this to me, but, well, I was probably anywhere from 6 to 10 in that age group, and I never said, well, how did they do that, and so on and so forth. So I just don't know how. Will they put it on rollers, or they might have disassembled the whole thing and brought it up and reassembled it. I mean, it was a construction of post and beam so that they could just very easily take it apart and bring it up.
Now, I've seen pictures from Ed Rote, and I have a couple pictures of the interior and the exterior of that church. But tell us how, as you come in from Gorham, where are doors in that building, and tell us about the inside of that structure, the Baptist church in Reed Corners.
Well, I think you're referring to what we call the angling road that goes from Gorham to Reed Corners.
Or the slant road.
And at that intersection, Depew Road comes in and forms a sort of a Y. And that church was located right on the north side at that location. There were two double doors out in front with two huge, beautiful maple trees at my time frame. You go in the double doors in the front, and there was a small vestibule where you would hang your hat on the pegs, and then on either side was a door that went into the sanctuary.
Okay.
Now,
how big was the vestibule, do you think, roughly?
10 by 12.
And that's just for pegs and...
Just for, your hat and coat. There was no, there was a deacon's bench on the back side of that, I suppose, so you could sit down and remove your boots or so forth. Now, on either side of this vestibule was a door that went into the sanctuary. That would be on the right or the left.
So if you go into the sanctuary, are you going north, away from the road?
If you turn. As you walk through those double doors, on the right or the left, there was a large round oak stove located at that point. Now, if you made a right or a left turn, you would then be looking to the north, the sanctuary. Now, there was an aisle on the right and an aisle on the left. There was no center aisles.
Okay. So you have three groups of pews?
Very true. The fact that there was no center aisles was always revolting to a lot of the girls, the Anna Frankishes, the Francis, and so forth. It didn't lend itself to a nice wedding formation.
Oh, yeah.
They were always, we wish we had a center aisle so we could come down the center aisle. Anyway, these aisles on either side went towards the front of the church. I think I've seen pictures, I think, to which you refer. There was about 20 rows of pews. And then there was a platform up in front. And as you look towards the front of the church, there was a choir loft to the right.
Okay.
Now, that platform up in front had the pulpit on it. And in the back of that platform was a door which led down into the kitchen of the
Is that
church.
that's the only way from the sanctuary into the kitchen?
No.
No?
On the left-hand side was, at the end of the aisle, was a door that went out into the Sunday school rooms. The significance of that door off the platform is where, if you were having a wedding or something and so forth, the minister and the groom would come up out of the kitchen right up onto the platform.
Okay.
Now on this platform, and I've helped my father do this, we would move the pulpit aside, tear up the floor, and fill the baptistry, which was located under that platform, with water. And we used to have to, my father would have a fire built out in the kitchen with boilers on it, and we try to take the temperature off the water that we put in the baptistry.
Oh, so you'd add at least warm water to the baptistry.
Yes.
How big would this baptistry be for baptisms?
Probably 8 feet long.
Really?
I mean, if you got a 6'5", 6 foot guy to, not that I remember that we have any, you would need that much room to get him down. And
Were there stairs down into that?
yes, stairs went down into that.
Huh.
Maybe 3 foot wide and maybe 3 foot deep.
Was this pressed tin or enamel like
Pressed
a
tin.
bathtub? Pressed
Tin, which was soldered up. You
Uh-huh.
can see the solder joints.
Uh-huh.
Had a drain on one end, which actually just drained out underneath the church. You pulled the plug and let the water out.
Just right under and it'd
and
dry
went
out
underneath
eventually?
the church. So that's then going back to the left-hand side. That went out into a small vestibule again, which had a door that exited there too. But going on back was a large room which had a lot of green curtains that you could divide into 4 sections, and that was for Sunday school
Okay,
purposes.
that's how they divided
yes.
that wing.
Otherwise, it was one large room, and I recall that when you had the annual meeting and so forth, that was used in the large room. Now, back in the 1890s, of course I don't know about this, but that room was rented to the Grange. And the Grange, which had then started in Reach Corners, used that room. And that was very successful, except that the Grangers wanted to play cards. And when they
Ooh.
started playing cards, the Baptists threw them right out of there. They couldn't play cards in that room anymore.
Did they go over to the Congregational Church or what they do?
No. I think that very soon they acquired the wagon shed down in the corners
Okay.
and built themselves a building
see.
of their own. But that was before that they had met in the Baptist church.
Now, you were born what month, day, and year?
10/4/32.
You were born in 32, and a lot of these things you're being told to you by your father.
Yes.
Now, you said that earlier, before we turned the tape on, there were 2 stoves in the sanctuary and 1 in the kitchen?
Yes. Well,
Okay.
there was also one in the large dining room, if you want to call it, which was used for Sunday school rooms.
Now, this was where they'd have the annual meeting.
Yeah.
So there were 4 stoves there.
Right.
Okay, were they all chunk wood stoves?
Yeah.
Or?
All wood. I mean, they used wood. Well, probably up until the 1940s, and there was a product that came out was known as coke. Now I don't know. My understanding of coke was anthracite coal, which had the gas burned out of it,
Hmm.
and it kind of looked like a piece of pumice.
Like a lava rock?
Yeah, that was coke. Well, anyway, that was burnt at that time. But prior to that, it was all wood.
Did people supply the wood in exchange for or toward their donations?
They supplied the wood. I don't know if there's any specific.
Okay.
Understand that at that time there was no uh, records for taxes or whatever. So, hey, you supplied the wood. Whether you mentally thought, well, okay, I've given wood, that constitutes my donation, I don't know.
Now you said that one of your Sunday morning chores was you and your dad would get the fires going?
Yeah, you had to, I mean, uh, I would dare say it would be, if 10 o'clock service, we'd go up at about 7 o'clock in the morning, because you're trying to put some heat into the whole sanctuary, and so you had to get the fires going. Uh, we usually took a bag of corn cobs and had some little kindling, but you didn't have a great amount. You had chunks.
Where is the wood stored?
Out and back, there was a woodshed off the kitchen, and it was stored in there, and it was covered up under cover there. And so that was where that was located.
So you'd start the two sister stoves in the sanctuary and then the stove out in the
Yeah,
Sunday school wing?
because there was classes, Sunday school classes, going to be held out there.
How often was the kitchen used?
Only for the. At one time, there used to be a Sunday school class out in the kitchen. It was crude, and but usually you moved them in into the big dining area, and you didn't try to start that if it wasn't necessary. So it's the three stoves that you had to get running.
Boy, in the dead of winter, that must have been pretty cold in that building.
Terribly cold.
Did they have outhouses out and back?
Yes,
Two of them?
yes. You walked out of the kitchen. You walked out of the kitchen, and well, within 3 or 4 feet was located the toilets, which were out there.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the sanctuary, down either side were brackets where a gas lamp held in the gas then, and
On the wall or on the pews?
up on the wall.
Okay.
Because I can recall, of course, children at that day, you always had to give a piece, which is a recitation for Children's Day, for Christmas, or something like that. And I can recall, going to the Children's Day program and seeing all them gas lamps, lit along the walls, and that was the lighting for the church. That church never had electric in it.
No electric.
Never.
The gas lanterns or lamps, did they each have their own little reservoir, or was there a pipe or something to
They
each
were
one of them?
Coleman table lamps,
Okay.
which most people had one in their home. And the bracket was nothing, a cast iron shelf that you bought, you didn't make, and it was screwed to the side of the wall, and that you would light that lamp and set it up on that bracket, and that was.
Okay.
So that was.
Now you said there were three deacons' benches on three sides of the stoves, and then one in the vestibule.
Yes, there was one
Okay.
right across the vestibule, which you could sit on to put your boots on or whatever the need might be. And
Was there a piano or an organ in the church? Or both?
both.
Both?
The organ, we used a piano through the Thursdays. Gerald Gage was very gifted in music. Gerald Gage come back from the service, and he had attended religious meetings of some type at other locations throughout the country, and we were nothing but country folk, and understand that Gerald had heard Gregorian chants and so
Mhm.
forth. Well, he had to have an organ, so there was a pump organ
Mm-hmm.
put down. We had an old pump organ, and he was trying to get the choir to do chants. It never went up for him.
I'll bet. Now, so he was the organist for the Baptist church. He wasn't the organist for the Congregational
Now,
church?
remember, at this time, we were in this joint meeting.
Oh, okay.
That started in 1920. 3 months, or 6 months in one and 6 months in the other.
In the 20s?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, both of them were destitute. They couldn't hire, they couldn't afford a pastor. And so that was the first joining of the two denominations to keep their own identity. I mean, they had to have their own, well, they had their own treasures, they had their own annual meetings, and so on and so forth. But they could join together for a common service.
And this was in the 20s?
Yes.
They had the same minister?
Well, Reverend Cook in the 1920s was the first one that they had. Now, only the Baptist church had a parsonage. So the Baptist church, in their financial, felt that they were contributing to the parsonage. So therefore, the Congregational church had to come up with more money. Because going back, I mean, I've studied this. Going back in the approximately the teens, in other words, the 1912s and so forth, the young people began to have a common young people's group called Christian Endeavor. Now, Christian Endeavor is where Howard Mumby and Mary Rote got together,
Mm-hmm.
and my folks got together, and it was nothing but the way it was in the 40s and 50s. If you married a Catholic, that was almost frowned upon. Well, it was frowned upon if a Baptist married a Congregationalist, so forth.
It was almost like a watered-down Catholic, was it?
Yes, I mean, I've never heard this myself, but my sister tells me that my grandmother was always in some kind of a spat with my mother, who was a Congregationalist, and she'd go out to her son, who was out in the bar, and says, "Oh, Harry, I wish you'd have married a nice Baptist girl." So that's how
It was the next thing to a pagan, right?
yeah. So that was so anyway, that's as a result of those young people going together, they finally decided that they could associate with each other and have start the church together and have 6 months in the Baptist and 6 months in the Congregational.
So when you're with your dad getting the church warmed up, for those 6 months, you're in the Baptist church.
Yeah.
Do you think it was because it was a smaller building, easier to heat? Why were you in the Baptist church in the wintertime?
Congregational, no, when we're building these fires, Steve, is usually you're into your Octobers and Novembers and your March and April. Now,
Okay.
in the Congregational church, you had a furnace.
Okay, so what months were you where?
In the coldest ones, in the December, January, and February, and so forth.
You're where?
We're over in the Congregational church.
Okay, they have a furnace.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, how did like your family? Did you earmark on your pledge that this money was toward the Baptist denomination?
Oh, Baptists had their envelopes in the Congregational.
Oh, that's how it happened.
You had two treasurers, and your money was kept separate as could be, and so forth.
Based upon discussions with your father, when do you think would have been the high point of vitality and membership for the Baptist church that is in Reed's Corners? What would be the heyday of that?
There never was a heyday.
Okay. Kind of limped along?
When they moved that church up there, the membership went from 30 to 37 to 40 people. And it really never varied any. I mean, even when the final closing of the Baptist church in the late 1940s. It was still about 35 members. So it's,
And that includes kids?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I've often, my grandfather and my father, you might be a deacon, you might be a trustee, you might be also a clerk. And I often thought to myself, well, geez, what'd you do, hog all the jobs? Well, the pure fact is, you take 30 people, you divide it in half.
You get the women out of there,
You
right?
get the women out, they couldn't hold any office. You had to take all them offices or they wouldn't be filled. So it wasn't the fact that they were so desired that they gave them everything, they had to fill all them things.
Now this Reverend Cook that's, when they're starting to blend together, was he Baptist or was he Congregational? Do you know?
Baptist.
He was Baptist. Now was he still in seminary? Was this a calling that he had to come
He was not in seminary.
to? Okay.
He lived in the parsonage and had a wife and 2 children, something like that. And so that was the start of it.
Was the parsonage rough like it was in the 60s?
Oh, rough as a cob. I mean, going back to well, you say the 60s. I of course, was in it always in the 50s or in the 40s. And Reverend Takianagi and his wife were there then. They had no bathroom. They had well, they did have a 1-lung furnace, but he had youth groups going in there all the time. The floor slanted. If you put a marble on one end, it would roll to the other end. And
Do you think the Baptists were able to buy that house for a song back when they did make it a parsonage?
I imagine. They did. They had. Well, we know of records that they had on parsonage before that. I never knew when they bought that particular building. Although,
Well, that would make sense because I saw a map that showed a Baptist parsonage down near where
on
you...
Depew Road.
Yes.
I don't know where the house ever went to.
I wonder if that would have been the Royer place.
I don't know.
But down near there...
That was a building down in there that they had. Okay, James Hartsough, who was the son of Henry Hartsough. James was a brother to my grandfather. He died when he was 37 years of age, but he was very active. If you go to the National Archives or the Baptist Archives in Rochester, his name is spilt all over there. And it is said at a meeting at the parsonage where last was sort of a condolence for his death. So
This is the parsonage that I knew, or
the
one
parsonage
you're
that
talking?
you knew.
Okay.
Now,
This is your great uncle then?
yeah,
Now,
he died in the 1880s. The
Well,
date I don't know. So
was he a pastor or just a cornerstone of the
just
church?
a cornerstone.
Okay.
He was a deacon and ran over all these areas for different meetings and so forth. And so he was Ed wrote and Grover wrote and so forth came after he was gone and so forth. And so I guess you might think that that parsonage existed as a parsonage for the church in the 1880s.
Well, I probably have it written down somewhere, but who was there after Cook?
Oh, there's a whole lot of them. I can't, his name sticks out in my mind because he was a friend of my folks and he was the first joint pastor.
Okay, when you were there, when you were a boy, are we talking Esperson and Witt and...
Well, Witt was way later.
Way later, okay.
Esperson was back in that 1930s. Ross, Ralph Ross, was in that time. Now, to give you a time frame, Ross was there.
For the bicentennial?
Um,
Who was the fellow that was there, the minister from New Hampshire, that had married Ralph and Dorothy Spohr? Maybe that wasn't.
Fordham.
Okay, Forrest Fordham.
Uh,
What do you remember from that church and that church's functions when you're 8 to 10 years of age, besides building the fire?
Helen Dewey was my school teacher.
Sunday school teacher?
I loved Helen.
Now, church was what to what, and Sunday school was what to what?
You mean an age?
No, time of day on Sunday.
Always after church. And that was before
A
church.
church was 10 to 11.
I think the church service was scheduled at 10, and Sunday school lot came in at 11 o'clock or something like
Okay.
that, to noon.
So the kids were in there during church.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
And would a Baptist sermon be 35 minutes? How long would a sermon be?
Yeah. In other words, the service itself and the sermon would consume an hour.
Okay.
There were no nurseries. There were no Sunday school teachers out to take care of children, so they didn't have to sit in church.
Did you have church picnics?
Oh, yes.
Where'd they go for those?
You might go to, one was held at Ted Dewey's lot, another was held at, down the end of Seneca Lake.
Go to Roseland?
Pardon?
Go to Roseland?
Don't recall that.
Hmm.
Vine Valley.
Okay.
I've got pictures of church picnics. I'm always amused. All the men sat with their dark blue suits and ties and so forth. The women sat there with their hats on and so forth. They were formal occasions, nothing like we experience in the 21st century. And,
Now, was there a youth group when you were about 12?
oh yes.
Was that just youth group?
I mean, it was the most active thing, Steve, you could ever think of for a church that size. Jack Tacchiani
Okay.
was the minister, and he had a 35 Ford, two-door, and he'd go up and down the roads before church and collect a carload of kids. There were no seat belts to worry about. There were no car seats to worry about. You'd get 10 kids hanging in that car.
This is for church?
For church.
Okay.
For youth group, we would have 12 to 15 every other Sunday, and it was held in the parsonage. And
What would you do?
Simon Says, musical chair, a devotional period, and to end up, think of this, his wife, whose name was Mary, always prepared cocoa and cookies and so forth, I didn't write in checks, caravan, but he'd take them home, and the rest of us, and we had baseball teams. And I got thinking, one of the most important things that I can think of is he made arrangements for us, the youth group. We went to Rochester and we visited a synagogue. We went to the Catholic Church and visited their youth groups, other denominations.
That didn't happen much, I'll bet.
I mean, it was the first, us country kids, is the first exposure that we had ever had to such a thing, such as that. And
Now, this is about what year?
this is in, 46, 45, 46, 47, in that time period.
Do you remember any public or not so public criticisms of having a Japanese preaching?
You haven't got enough tape for the whole story, but
Well, you don't have to mention names, but tell me how that all shook out, because that must have been quite interesting.
we were good as far as
Tolerance?
tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
But we needed it, we were using student pastors from Colgate Rochester. In the fall, well, in the summer, the previous pastor had left. And so come fall, we needed a pastor. So you call Colgate Rochester and say, we need a pastor, we'd like to have a student come. Jack Takayanagi, who was then, the first Japanese around, he caught a bus, I think he told me it was a 7 o'clock bus to Canandaigua.
This is the first day he's supposed to preach?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
He walked from Canandaigua to Ridge Corners, and he went, now I think he went to the Congregationalist Church.
Okay.
Now this was in early fall. And he went to he got there probably, 9:30 in the morning. Got there.
Wrong church?
And we never locked the church doors. He went into the church. Come find out, we were all over in the Baptist church.
Do you remember that day?
Yep,
That the preacher doesn't show up?
yep. So he, of course, says to himself, after 10:30 or so, they just won't accept me. So he walked back to Canandaigua and got a bus back to Rochester. In the meantime, we were sitting over in the Baptist church, and the minister never showed up. Now, I think it was Ed Rowe called Rochester, said, your fellow never showed up. Well, they checked it back, and he said, well, I did show up. I was right there.
Within a week, did they figure out what had happened?
Yeah. They said, well, send us a minister. So they sent him back
The following Sunday.
the following Sunday. And
Did he have to walk from,
Yeah. Oh,
Canada?
yeah. He was a bugger as far as that goes. He got his bus to Canandaigua and walked over. And
I wonder if the bus would have gone on to Geneva, he could have got off at 247.
well, he was smart, but I guess we weren't figuring it out that far. You know what I mean? So he gave the minister, he gave the sermon in the Baptist church.
This is probably around 46?
Yeah, yes.
Wow.
And so, and we accepted him. I mean, of course, you've had some experiences on pulpit committees. Small churches like that don't have big choices.
Yeah.
So,
But
so we accepted him, and the terms were they offered him a calling for $1,200 a year. And Jack says, do you have a parsonage? Yeah, we got one. Well, he says, I would like to accept this, but I want to live in the parsonage. Well, the powers to be, whether it be Ed Rowe or any of them, as well, maybe you better go look at the parsonage.
Were they renting it out to somebody else, or was there
I think
nobody there?
It was just empty.
Huh.
So he goes, looks in the parsonage, yes. He says, I'll move here.
Do you have any idea, Lloyd, whether he was in an internment camp?
Oh, he came, his folks came from Japan. They worked on farms as day laborers in California. His father finally collected enough money and bought about a 25-acre farm. And Jack had two brothers, and they worked that farm growing nursery stock. And I think it was probably the first months of 1942,
Huh.
February or March. I mean, they just simply came to him and said, "You're going to Colorado
Mm-hmm.
to an, I want to call it a concentration camp. I
Yeah.
mean, you can call it an internment camp."
Yep.
So they took the whole family and they went to Colorado. Now, Jack had finished 1 year of college. He went to UCLA and was going to be an artist for Walt Disney.
Really?
And so they went to concentration camp. And years ago, Jack showed us some pictures of it. And Colorado is, there are farms there, but his father, in his ingenious way, grew a huge garden in the concentration camp,
Mhm.
and so therefore, okay, they were there for about 2 years. They were then to be released, and his two brothers went into that Japanese regiment
Nisei?
and went to Italy. Jack married this little Japanese girl, and he went to Drake University, which is in Iowa. And after his final year at that university, he felt a calling to go into religion.
Mm-hmm.
And so he went to his counselors and said, "I want to go to a seminary." Well, they said, "Well, Jack, you're not going to go to seminary. Fullerton Seminary in California, they will never accept you. Dallas Theological Seminary, they will never accept you. But if you want to try, there's a school in the east, Colgate, Rochester. Why don't you write to them, apply?" And he wrote to them and applied, and that's where he was accepted, and that's how he got from the West Coast to the East Coast.
Do you know what happened to his brothers in combat?
One was wounded, but they both lived.
They both lived.
Yeah, and came back, and they went back to California. Now, the father never got his farm back. It was sold for taxes, or